Hi everyone, it is your girl Athena Alaya and my most beautiful friend, professional astrologer, Karen Teal. Karen, it's so great to be back with you again. How have
Oh,
you been?
likewise. I've been good. How have you been?
Wonderful. I can't complain. A lot of transformation and transition this year, but I feel like everybody's definitely experiencing that and being more mindful of that, which I really love because as I've been witnessing, I feel like collective transformation over the past few years. There's those phases of transformation where you just get lost in the current and it's difficult to see the forest for the trees, so to speak. But I feel like almost as if there's been a breakthrough recently, which I attribute to all of those planets having transited through Pisces and now, restarting essentially an entirely new cycle. And I think that that has, the culmination of the various lessons related to that end cycle in Pisces has given people a deeper awareness of themselves and a more mindful awareness of their transformations. And so I'm starting to see that develop and that makes me very happy.
Oh,
So
yeah. It's almost like we went through like a collective dark night of the soul, and then there's almost this new kind of, because we're all in this Aries with this fire, we have almost this new spark of hopefully potential for pioneering and changes that can be made like on a microcosmic and macrocosmic scale. But it's definitely some interesting times that we're in, and with all the planets having changed signs, it definitely feels like the energy has shifted in a big way. And so I'm excited to talk about these changes with you and how it's going to affect us on every level that we can think of, spiritually, physically, emotionally. And yeah, so we'll see how it goes for the rest
all
of the
we can do
year.
is witness it, right? Witness
Yeah.
it and move through it, recognizing the lessons for ourselves and leveraging our past, the skills that we've developed through our past lessons. And yeah, I feel it. I'm feeling very positive about it. So, well, we did want to talk about in this podcast episode today some various transits coming up related to Jupiter. So one of the biggest ones coming up, of course, is Jupiter in Cancer, which is going to be occurring through July 2026. So Jupiter's just entered Cancer, and I'm going to pass the floor over to you to kind of give an overview of what that really means to people individually and collectively, and then maybe we can just chat a little bit about the esoteric significance of what that means with respect to consciousness.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we might have felt this shift like when Jupiter went from Gemini, where he's not super thrilled to be there because he's in his it's the opposite sign from what he wants. So he's in his fall there. The energy absolutely would have shifted to kind of a softer energy because Cancer is that sign of the mother, and really the collective can be more concerned about how we're protecting ourselves. There's going to be a bigger focus on money because Cancer tends to collect things, and um, and so when Jupiter's in Cancer, you can expect like this to be kind of blown up. So there could be things where money could get better for a lot of people, which is really good, depending on what else is going on in your chart and where it is. But there also could be a bigger focus on women in general with Jupiter and Cancer. We could find that women are stepping into their power more, getting their voices heard more, and being just louder because Jupiter is not a planet that you can ignore. He really, quite literally, blows everything up. And um, I would hope that women who are maybe hoping for this opportunity in the past, we can rise to the occasion and really show what we want for the future and what and maybe even because Jupiter has a lot to do with teaching on a higher level, maybe teach these men or whoever, what kind of what can be more acceptable for us moving forward. And and I mean, we're Sagittarius is a sign that is, um, you know, they're very brazen in how they speak. And so you have that Jupiterian influence. And while Jupiter is in Cancer, you still have kind of this jolly, boisterous way of Jupiter expressing his energy, but it's just going to be filtered through this kind of softer energy of Cancer. So it's almost like you might underestimate Cancerian energy because it kind of can recoil into its shell and it can be softer. But when it's in when Jupiter's in Cancer, there would still be this immense power behind it. So hopefully we can use this energy to our advantage because Jupiter's actually quite happy to be in Cancer. So, and when the energy is flowing better, I think that just in general, people could be more apt to, protect themselves and stand up for things and even protect others that they care about. And in this day and age, this is something that's really needed.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I'm already starting to see that reflected. Even this week, I've had a number of conversations with women in the esoteric field, um, specifically about this topic, about their voice and their voice being louder, so to speak, on a public platform. Women expressing, the desire to come forth as leaders in the esoteric community. And I look at the Jupiterian and Cancer energy almost, I mean, at least where we are now, archetypically speaking, as that male advocacy for women, right? Like the power of the true divine masculine coming forth and offering that abundant support to women to come out of their shell, to express themselves, and to show the power and depth related to the womb waters, right? And the wisdom that comes from delving deep into the womb and that birthing process, right? And what that has to share for the world. And if we look, at the collective, it's very obvious the collective is going through a rebirthing process, and that a lot of things are changing, and it's freaking people out, right? And people are wondering, how do we manage and handle that? And I think that this Jupiter and Cancer energy is going to offer a really nice balanced approach to combining the higher enlightened aspects of the true self intellect, illuminating energy with that internal powerful birthing energy, and also the facets of related to Cancer with respect to compassion, right? To conscious compassion, not to compassion related to mitigating this oneself and hiding oneself and saying, oh, well, I'm not going to say that because I'm being compassionate, but recognizing how to communicate effectively and to teach and guide through example as the true pathway of compassion.
I love that. Yeah. And yeah, we're definitely seeing, and I hope that we see more of this, of women coming out. And I think we will, especially when we get kind of into this aspect that we're going to talk about in a little bit, where Jupiter is going to square Saturn. I would not be surprised if we have women revealing things. Maybe, we might see a few more powerful men fall with a transit like this. And it could be because a woman chose to speak up. And we're already kind of seeing that, but these things that we're seeing now could be empowering women to now, when they're kind of in this good energy, that they can, now's their time to speak up too. And I really hope that in terms of getting back a lot of women's rights that have been taken away recently, I'm hoping that it will lead towards that too, where we kind of can go back to where women had more freedom of their bodies and things like that.
Yeah,
But
why don't we use that to segue over into this Jupiter Saturn square? That's going to be on the 15th because this represents a clash between idealistic feelings and structural limitations. And I think we're definitely seeing that in the collective. You know, people are beginning to rise up to what they perceive to be true ideals of freedom, like true freedom, not dogmatic freedom, but inner freedom and personal autonomy, and being able to be able to uh, be amongst others who have achieved true personal autonomy, and being able to work with each other collectively, right, to break free of structural limitations that have been placed on society. And, on a side quest note, we are going through that Pluto and Aquarius transit. We talked about this last year. We said, it probably would take, about a year or two before we really started to see the impact of Pluto and Aquarius. And now we're in that time. And sure enough, things are popping off very thematically with respect to that what I would consider to be a huge transformative transit. And now with the square coming up, I think that's going to be it's going to be an important event in terms of moving things forward. People think about squares as these horrifying things, these challenges or whatever, but really they're opportunities, right? Really for us to perceive and understand where our limitations are so we can move forward. That's what a square is to me. Where the limitations are so we can break out of the box, break out of that square, and move forward.
Oh,
What do you think about that?
absolutely. Yeah. So I have 15 squares in my chart. I have multiple mutable grand crosses, and I totally agree with you. I always see it as like I constantly hit these kind of challenge walls where they can be overcome. It's just almost like it's trying me to see, can I kind of think of an out of the box solution? There are these 4 points pulling at me of the that make up the square. There's 4 planets that are causing tension on you, and how do you reconcile that? Well, if it was like a T square, you would have you'd have the 3 points pulling, and then you'd have this other invisible point, basically, that, well, not invisible, but what it makes up the full cross, and that would be kind of like your way out. But when you have the full grand cross, you have all 4 points pulling. So what's your way out? And it really forces you to think of kind of unconventional ways, and being flexible can really help you. And just, kind of, you kind of have to take it as it comes, and each one is going to be dealt with a little bit differently. And so we'll see that, and we might see some really creative and interesting ways of kind of combating this energy. But just so we know about the Jupiter square Saturn, I will share that it is at 1 degrees. So that means Jupiter in Cancer will be at 1 degree Cancer, and Saturn will be at 1 degree Aries, and they'll be squaring each other. 1 degrees is an Aries degree, so we almost doubly emphasize this kind of Aries energy. And so what is Aries really? I mean, Aries is the pioneer of the zodiac. It's the one to run into battle first. It's the warrior. It does have a lot to do with war. And, the astrologers have been predicting for quite a while that this year would be very important in a war sense, in a worldly sense. And we're even starting to see a little bit of that now. But Aries is about this birth that you're mentioning. It's coming into this, coming out of a dark place, coming into the light, and doing something in a completely new way. Or Aries is not influenced really by, it's the first sign, so it doesn't have like this influence of all the other signs in the zodiac on it. So it doesn't need to really follow any rules. And if you have any Aries in your life, you know that they really don't follow anyone's rules but their own, and they are very headstrong, and they can just, they're the ones that are brave, and they will, start something new without really worrying about how it's going to turn out. They just want to get it started and get it going. And so, um, it feels like we've been trudging through the mud for kind of a while, maybe the last year or so. And it's really kind of, all this Aries energy is just kind of this explosion of into change. And we just kind of have to deal with it as it comes. And I did look up the Sabian symbols for these aspects that we're talking about. 1 degree, and a Sabian symbol is kind of a representation of that degree, and it can give you a lot of details into, how to interpret the degrees on a deeper level. And Aries 1 degree is the symbol of a woman rises out of the water, and a seal rises and embraces her. And the seal, I've read, is supposed to represent maybe kind of like a phallic kind of, because they're kind of phallic shaped. But it's interesting because we do have this kind of repeated theme of women empowerment. And then the Sabian symbol for 1 degrees Cancer is a furled and unfurled flag displayed from a vessel. And so we really are going back on these kind of Aries themes, masculine versus feminine themes. And, we also have this idea of kind of protection and defense when you have this a flag. And I don't know, it's just really interesting things to ponder, maybe to think about kind of as we see how these aspects are going to transpire throughout the world. It'll be interesting to see how they go with those Sabian symbols, but I'm definitely curious about your thoughts on everything.
Well, one thing I want to bring to the table is the fact that Saturn now is also in Aries. And Aries is, yes, traditionally that initiating energy, an unbridled energy. But Saturn being in Aries now brings structure. And while people think about Aries with respect to war and the war god Aries, also in terms of ancient times, Aries was also associated with the goddess Athena, who's also a war goddess. But where she falls into the category of war is with respect to strategy and wisdom. So I think that, while we are definitely going to see some new things being initiated, new ideas, new approaches, some unbridled energy, I don't think it's going to be as chaotic as just a pure, like, yod kind of, I'll do what I want energy. I think it's going to come with more collective wisdom that's been being achieved for some time. I mean, collectively speaking, almost almost anyone that is, in their 20s and beyond at this point has some recollection of the housing market crisis and the pandemic and other very significant global events that impacted collective consciousness, right? It wasn't like, oh, this is just going on in one country. No, it was happening globally and it affected everyone globally. And it changed us collectively and made people's perceptions related to things like structures, stability, who they trust, change drastically, right? And I think these kind of themes are going to be, that we saw when Pluto was in Capricorn start coming to a head now in Pluto and Aquarius and push forward this energy. And I think that, with the planets transiting through Aries, especially Saturn, we're going to find there's more structure and wisdom to that energy and more strategy being applied, right? More conscious revolution rather than just like fire against fire. It'll be more of a wisdom against a old guard structured system. That's what I see in terms of the two contending forces, and it'll be the collective individuals working together to bring wisdom into that situation that I think will help move it forward. And I see that being displayed in these Sabian symbols, as well, with the flag furled and unfurled, right? It doesn't matter if it's furled or unfurled, it's still a flag, right? Whether it's open, whether the energy is open and expressive, or whether it's closed and introverted and collecting itself, fundamentally speaking, it's still a flag. And I think that that's very highly indicative of human consciousness, right? Whether we're reflecting outwardly into the macrocosm or inwardly into our microcosm, that consciousness is still the same. And I think people are starting to recognize and realize that that's a fundamental truth, right? Is this consciousness that we experience individually and collectively is ultimately the same. And that realization, that collective realization, is going to change a lot of how we approach things. So and then in terms of the woman coming out of the sea, and the seal, that's an interesting symbol too, because it makes me think about how Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was essentially born out of the sea. And and seals are in and of themselves pretty, there's a lot of Aries nature to them. Like, they look all cute and stuff, but if you've actually paid attention to seals, they can be pretty warmongering creatures, right?
They can
And
be quite aggressive if they want to, and they can also be quite sweet. You hear of them. I heard of one that saved, there was someone who tried to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, and a seal actually swam under him and created a current and pushed him up. So it's almost like ocean's man best friend, but they also have this other instinctual, maybe even vicious side of them too. So very interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and that archetype of a creature that can be both compassionate but also very violent, being combined with this feminine figure, right? That's just coming out from the sea. It's just coming out from the depths of her emotion, right? Creates, I think, this balance and understanding that a feminine presence can combine with that presence that balances out both compassion, sweetness, but also almost very violent nature. And what really comes to my mind is, I've heard this now probably like 5 times from different people in the past week. A peaceful person is really only someone that's capable of great violence, but chooses peace. That means that they are in control of themselves. They have mastery over themselves, and they discern whether or not violence is the correct or incorrect pathway based on that higher discernment. It's not based on impulse, it's based on discernment. And I think that that's very indicative of this energy here, in terms of the square happening between Saturn and Jupiter. Is, in order to get through squares, you have to be discerning. You have to think outside the box. You have to recognize where the what's the word I'm looking for? The keystone is, right? All right. Well, let's see. We also wanted to talk water themes. We're also going to have a Jupiter square Neptune, which I feel this is a very, very interesting one for me in terms of archetypical mythos. But before we get into that, go ahead and give everybody a rundown on the Jupiter square Neptune.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we got some watery energy going on here, mixed in with that fiery Aries energy. So we're gonna have Jupiter in Cancer on the 18th, and it's at night, I think, for us on the West Coast. And yeah, but so it's at 2 degrees, and so yeah, with Jupiter in Cancer, Neptune in Aries. What's interesting is that both Jupiter and Neptune are the rulers of Pisces. Jupiter being the traditional ruler of Pisces, Neptune being the modern ruler of Pisces. So we're throwing in some Piscean themes that we're all very familiar with after all the stelliums that we had in Pisces recently, prior to all this Aries. And I'll share the Sabian symbols because they're interesting too. Now, the Sabian symbol of 2 degrees Aries is a comedian reveals human nature. That'll be an interesting one because Neptune has a lot to do with the movie industry and acting and things like that. Well, I mean, Leo is more the acting, I would say, but the Neptune rules the movie industry because it's the fantasy of it. But it can also rule, like, it has a lot to do with musicians and musical talent too. So, and then Jupiter can be, quite literally a larger than life person. So with that, in mind, with the Sabian symbol, we could quite literally have a comedian revealing something about human nature or standing up in some way. Now, the Sabian symbol for Cancer at 2 degrees is a man on a magic carpet hovers over a large area of land. So we have these interesting repeated themes where, and the comedian doesn't say which gender it is, it can be either one. The 2 degrees Cancer is represented by a man specifically on a magic carpet. And so it's almost like, maybe some people have been watching things that have been going on. And, and then the Aries can bring kind of the action to that. But yeah, it's just a really interesting one. And I'll be curious to hear what you think about the mythology of this, because with Jupiter and Neptune, it's essentially Zeus having some type of conflict or challenge with Poseidon, right? When you get these two planets and then they're working in these energies. So very curious because you know so much about the mythology.
So when I was initially contemplating this, what was coming to me was this idea between the dichotomy of that sky related energy, right? The energy of the what someone call the higher self, the true self, the Atman, right? The alchemically speaking, the spirit, the Mercury, and the depths of the ocean, right? The sometimes it can be, there's a lot of turmoil in the ocean, but the deeper you go into the ocean, the more calm it becomes, right? Just due to the pressure.
Yeah.
And when I give lectures on meditation, I talk about this phenomenon a lot in terms of human consciousness at the surface level. There's a lot of fluctuations, just like when you're looking at the sea. But as you go deeper and deeper, it becomes calmer and calmer, right? And yet we see the same thing occurring, right, in an ascension process in terms of those spiritual high states of consciousness. It's almost like it creates this kind of loop, right, where you see functionally whether you go internally or externally, right? If you're studying a path that's more internal and reflective, like a meditative path versus a transformational path, like you might see in high magic, they use different techniques and tools that might seem as if they're going opposite ways, but then in the end, they actually end up in the same position, right? But now we're talking about a square, and again, when you have a square, it represents a challenge, right? Forces that are pulling against themselves, that are asking you to see things from a different light, right? You can't just live in that challenge and think you're going to get the understanding, right? Because you get locked into the fluctuations, the currents, which fundamentally speaking exist both in the water, at the surface of the water, but if you're thinking about rising up in the air too, right, you have air currents as well that continue on until you start getting closer and closer to space, in which it's a vacuum, right? So you have these fluctuating currents opposing each other, right? So how do you get through that? Well, you have to recognize what the themes are that are being presented to you. And then you have to ask yourself, what your impulses are related to that. Because people want to move through challenges impulsively, reactively, emotionally. or even intellectually, right? Like I'm going to argue you out of your position, right? And yet that provides no reconciliation point at all. And so being able to keep a flexible mind and an internal stability within your emotions is often the what gives you the revelation. So to me, this is a current of revelation that's being presented, and asking each person individually as well as the collective to find that space of silence that exists both in space and at the depths of your inner consciousness, so that you can break free and find that reconciliation point.
Absolutely.
I
I love
totally lost. Oh, the Sabians.
that.
The jester. What was it referred to as, the jester?
It said the comedian, but I wonder if like back in the day they would have said the jester. I wonder if that's a modernized version, but it's
I
very
love the Loki current myself.
yeah.
What a little asshole.
Yeah.
But he's fantastic, right?
Sometimes that's needed.
It
And
is needed.
Sagittarius knows that well. I mean, not like sometimes they know that they have to like speak up about stuff or even say things in kind of an asshole way to get their point across, because it's really there's all this freedom and truth having to do with Jupiter, and then with Neptune it's like peering behind the veil. So absolutely things are going to be revealed, things are going to be blown up or brought to the surface. Um, and it's going to be very interesting, and it's just going to how are we going to react to it? Are we going to go off that instinctual, or are we going to be discerning?
Yeah.
And so that's our test, I guess.
Well, I think that this is highly applicable because what does that jester Loki comedic energy do? It purposefully attempts to trigger you,
Yes.
right?
Ah,
And it utilizes language and symbolism that gets around your analytical mind to hit you at the heart, right? That's why it's that jester current. It almost utilizes language and art to bypass the intellect, the gates of the intellect, and hit you, quote unquote, where it hurts, right? But if you are walking a spiritual path mindfully, then you recognize the benefit of that. You want to, you want, I mean, nobody wants to feel the trigger, right?
sometimes it's needed though.
To recognize that the trigger is the tool, right? That when you feel that inside, that's an indication to you of something that you need to learn, right? So to me, it's the Loki energy, that could be presented to you in a variety of different ways, right? But it will probably be in a way that you don't consider, in a way that's non-normal, non-typical, that's going to bypass the intellect and hit you and reveal something to you, as long as you're willing to pay attention to it, right? As long as you're not resisting it, you're accepting, okay, I recognize I feel this way. What does it mean? And then you go explore that through the depths and the heights of your consciousness to reconcile that. And I think that goes into, the flying carpet analogy too. And I'm going to get super nerdy here, just FYI. One thing I love about air and water, and they're both fluids. If we look at it from a physical perspective, water and air are both fluids, which shows why they're not irreconcilable, right? And so what's the magic carpet doing? He's cruising on that fluid current, right? Totally free, totally free. He has overcome the bounds of the earth, or he or she, whomever is navigating that carpet, right? They've overcome that which has bounded them, and they're living in a boundless state. And not only that, but clearly, if you're riding a magic carpet, right, you've achieved some control over reality, right? It's a tool that indicates that you have become a master of reality, and you no longer have to be grounded in the physical plane because you can transcend it to other realms and navigate those other realms.
Yeah.
So what this indicates to me in the overall symbolism is that yes, there's going to be triggers that come. There's going to be opportunities to reconcile the inner and outer worlds, and that for those who do it, they're going to gain mastery over themselves, but also over the currents of we'll just say quote unquote other realities, right? Of other realms. If people are willing to put in the work to be able to achieve that, and that could happen individually and collectively.
Yeah. That's I'm just taking all that in because it's a lot to think about, and I'm going to be thinking about it a lot later. I know too. Um, Very interesting stuff. And it says specifically for that magic carpet that he's hovering over a large area of land. And so it's interesting that it specifies that it's not just he's hovering over some small area and focused on one thing. There's this idea of a bigger picture at hand, too. And that he has, he's had mastery over his realm, over because he can ride on a magic carpet. He has magic. But how is his personal mastery going to affect the collective, going to affect, everything, your world on a macrocosmic scale? It's really about that idea, like as within, so without, as above, so below. You change what's going on inside of you microcosmically, and then your whole outside will change as well. Your macrocosmic environment will change too. So as we reveal things, as we find out things, because we're undoubtedly going to find some things out, I would think, with this transit. What are we going to do with that information that we find out? Is someone going to have take a fall from this because we have this comedian revealing human nature? Are we going to is it there going to be some kind of sacrifice hanged man situation with this? Um, Jupiter, in a lot of senses, is the comedian. We associate him as kind of being jolly, and Jupiterian energy is quite funny. And so it almost kind of doubles down on this idea that something is going to be unveiled, and it will be on a small scale and a large scale. So you're probably going to learn something about yourself in the process of this. And, and since we have this repeated theme of Pisces, you know, my advice here would just be to kind of go with the flow of things. That's how Pisces is, and really assess how you're going to respond to this. Lean towards the side of peace. That's kind of how Pisces is. And there's always this idea of self-sacrifice when you're thinking about Pisces or Neptune. Is that going to be to your own detriment? Is it going to be something that ends up being helpful? Are you doing it too much? And it's just, yeah. But we also have this idea of, with all these aspects that are happening right now, they're happening at 1 and 2 degrees. These are the beginnings of something. And because we're working in cardinal signs, 0 to 1 degrees of cardinal signs is considered critical to astrologers, because it really means that there's the start of something. It's like a jump start almost. So it'll be interesting to see how the week goes. And we do want to remember that things don't, they're not going to happen on the exact day. Of course, I always have to do this disclaimer. A lot of times these are kind of trigger points of these energies, and you can feel it leading up to it, but the backlash of it will usually happen a little bit later. So I would be surprised if it happens right on the day, but these are slow moving planets. That's why these themes are these aspects are such a big deal, because these planets are the slower moving. And so they don't have these aspects as often as the faster moving planets. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of what else maybe we can talk about with these. It's really going to be a fun time for us. And it is just, you mentioned earlier, and I even read like I think it's like a Buddhist quote where just about observation, not judging, not reacting right away, just observing what is going on. And then again, as you mentioned, really just discerning how, based on my wisdom, based on strategy that we have accrued through our experiences, like Athena would bring to the situation, how are we going to respond to this individually and as a collective? There is going to be a big focus on women. In your microcosmic world, your mom could be very important during this time because we do have quite a lot of Cancer. There could be something to learn from her. She could learn something from you. Um, but, and then I can't rule out the idea that some of us might get into a little tiff with our moms because just we have this Aries theme. Or, you could be having some realizations. How were you nurtured growing up? Do you have any resentment about that? With the Jupiter square Neptune, really, we could be going deep into our psyches and even, if you have to cry something out and release some pent up energy, it really is good for you health wise to do that because we do have, when you have Cancer and then also this Neptunian energy going on, I kind of think of, emotional type stuff coming up as well. So it's going to be, there's going to be a lot going on, to say the least. And we've already been feeling it. Really just nurture yourself throughout all of this. Be kind to yourself throughout all of this. That also has a lot to do with Cancer and Pisces. Let's not beat each other up too much or beating ourselves up too much. And really just having a look at ourselves too. Aries is the self. What needs to be learned about ourselves so we can go out into the world wiser and stronger and make better decisions and have better discernment. So all of those things could be relevant for us. And yeah, and I'm curious to know your thoughts.
What my intuition is telling me is that this is going to be, it's going to be a beneficent time to reflect on the role that our emotions play in our lives. And not just in terms of how we reflect on ourselves and our immediate environment, but also the global scale. And I'm emphasizing the expansion of global consciousness right now, or the collective consciousness right now, because it's my personal perspective that with the Pluto and Aquarius transit that's happening, there's just going to be so much emphasized in the collective. And I think, and I like to look at transits, certainly with respect to that, because Pluto is God of the underworld. He's God of death and rebirth. He's God of power, true power, right? Not this fake power, oligarchical power, but real power that comes from the death and rebirth process. And I'm already watching that happen, right? And so I feel like it's, what happens on a collective scale affects us individually as well. I mean, not to go down a super dark path here or anything, but I mean, seriously, I'm having conversations with people every day who are just, they don't even feel secure about their job. People are worried about food. People are worried about, we had a big bee die off, globally. People are worried about, like, are we going to even have enough food? That could be very scary for people. And I watch people sit in that, right? And they get themselves looped into these fear patterns. And so, in my perspective, it's very important to pay attention to what you're fearful of.
Yes.
Because being able to work through and overcome your fears is the essence of rebirth, right? Like, what is it that Pluto does? he requires you to die to the old, right? He pulls you through the underworld. And why is the underworld so terrifying? Because it makes you face all of your fears, whatever that is, emotional, personal, fear of death, fear of being alone, fear of pain, fear of, all your insecurities are going to get brought to the surface. But in there is your true power as well when you allow yourself. So, with the expansion, the expanded energy of Jupiter in the emotional center, essentially, of nurturing Cancer, I think that there's a key there right now for us in the next year to recognize how when we expand ourselves emotionally, right, in a mature way, not in a reactive way, but in a way that's aligned with our true nature, then we can offer that comfort, to ourselves and others to work through fears, not in a what's the word I'm looking for? A hindering way, right? But in a truly expansive healing way. I think people aligning themselves to their growth in service, whatever they're called to do, is an excellent pathway for healing, right? Especially as we see things happening on a global scale, like what can I do to help my community, help my family, help stick up for the rights of others that are being downtrodden. That, for those of us who've been spiritual mentors, we come to learn that, in serving others, we grow significantly in our knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and also in our own personal maturity, because we're given so many opportunities to see that growth reflected in others and it reflecting back on us. So I think that would be a positive tool for people, to help when you're feeling helpless. Helping others can often help you to not feel like totally stuck in any of your fears that may come up. And then really working your path, whatever your path is, to stay rooted in your divine guidance, whatever that is for you, to give you that inner strength, because from that inner strength you can navigate and manage anything, right? It gives you the ability to have control over your mind, your emotions, and then that allows you to protect your energy and to discern events wisely. Because let's be honest, there's going to be a lot of forces. I mean, there always are, but especially the things that we're seeing, obviously, very obviously on the news, there's going to be a lot of forces out there that want to feed that fear into your head. And what happens when people become fearful? They become easily controlled. When you are placed into a reactive situation, you are easy to control. And so Jupiter's energy, being that energy associated with your true self, gives you the ability and the capacity, if you work with that energy, to remain in control of yourself, and then to leverage a true solidified emotional state to be able to discern wisely. I guess that would be my final reflection.
Yeah, I mean, that is so needed. And I love that you brought up this idea of security too, because Cancer is all about security. Um, and so, I mean, yeah, that's definitely going to be one of the bigger themes too. And yeah, I mean, I love that. I think that's a great place um to leave it, I guess.
All right. Well, let us do that then. Everyone, it's always a pleasure and a blessing. Thank you for joining us. Karen, I always love chatting with
I
you.
love it too. I love chatting with you.
The things you bring to the table. I love that we have different perspectives that we can share and bounce off of each other. So I'll look forward to working with you again soon.
Yeah, we'll have some more videos for you guys soon, hopefully. Thanks for watching.
We love you, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.